Welcome, everyone, to episode 144 of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, and I am sorry, but I had to stop what I was doing, which was preparing the ancient Egyptian feast for Ishtar to come and record this podcast episode. But you know what? I think it's worthwhile. But no, I'm not the only one who is here thumbing through the archives of the public domain. No, who else is here with me?
Well, it's me, Steve Guntley, and remember our policy: you gag, we bag. This is the podcast about tongue rips, blood feasts, and spectacularly clumsy one-liners. That's because this is the podcast about Filmgore, the 1983 montage of some of the goriest B flicks of the era, hosted by the iconic mistress of the dark herself, Elvira. Yes, we finally get a chance to talk about Elvira on this show, and I'm very excited for it. And I'm also very excited to tackle this almost completely dead genre of film, which we will get into. But first, we need to introduce our guest. We're very excited to have him here, and they are very excited to be talking about Filmgore. So who is joining us today?
Yeah, sometimes it's really fortuitous, when we get somebody who's super passionate about the movie that we're going to watch, who may or may not have picked it for us. More on that later. But no, we're joined today by author John Collins. He lives on Long Island, and as most Long Islanders are wont to do, he is convinced that every abandoned house is haunted, and I tend to agree with him. He has a book called The Leeds Point Horror, which is now available on Amazon. I asked him what was upcoming, and he said the words, he's working on something wet. And that sounds kind of cryptic, and I hope it's not this podcast. But John, thank you anyway for taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. Any chance to talk about Filmgore, I'm all in.
And
doesn't happen too often.
By something wet, I assume you're directing the sequel to Deep Star 6, Deep Star 7?
Deep Star 5, the prequel.
Oh, the prequel. Oh, okay.
Prequel,
We're going back to
yeah.
the origins. We're answering
the
question.
The origins of the giant lobster, yes.
The deep stars are like DEFCONs, like the further the lower the number, the more intense they are.
Yeah, or like golf. Yeah, it's like golf rules with the deep stars, Yeah.
All you need is some good blue screen and you're good to go for underwater action. So I'm all for it.
Well, we're excited to have you here, and it's great to hear that you're enthusiastic about talking about Filmgore, because I think it's pretty safe to say this is a movie that's pretty far below most people's radars. And I'm just curious a little bit about what is your relationship with this movie? Why did you want to talk about this one in particular?
I saw this movie in 1984. I saw it. We were one of the first families in our neighborhood to have a VHS player, and that became our de facto babysitter. My parents would go out, they'd rent us movies, and they would bring stuff back. Well, I mean, they were a little, in retrospect, they weren't strange. Like, they had no problem with us watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but they had a problem with us watching Porky's.
Interesting.
Like, okay, he won't hit someone with a sledgehammer, but I don't want him peeking into a girl's shower in high school. So in retrospect, I get it. But they rented this movie because they like, oh, it's just scenes of movies. And it was me. I was 12 at the time. My brother was 10, and they went out to wherever the hell is they went to. And we sat there and watched this movie. And the only movie we saw on this list in this compilation was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Everything else, I kind of saw the box covers, but I never really watched the movies. And this was just a mind blower for me. I was just like, wow, it's awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah, this movie is very akin, it's that kind of compilation movie that you don't get anymore, and it's very akin to a movie that I remembered, which was Terror in the Isles.
Yep.
But there's a major difference kind of between, Terror in the Isles had a lot of scenes. I think this movie is very interesting to me because it's not like it's not a trailer collection. Like, a lot of times you watch a movie like this and it would be just a compilation of trailers because trailers are readily available. This is like and easy to acquire, presumably. This is abridged versions of feature-length movies all compiled together, or as I like to call it, wait for it, Bleeder's Digest.
I was just about to make the same goddamn terrible joke. Oh my god. We
I was
we
gonna
have
say,
a
I was
just-
going the
just-
same direction.
Just edit
We
in,
are-
edit in like a sad trombone noise.
Oh my god, that's too good. Yeah, that's exactly right though. Yeah, that's exactly what these are. I think with a lot of films of this type, and we'll kind of get into the history of this sort of genre, but yeah, you're exactly right. It's usually the trailer images, or it's usually much shorter chunks of the movie. I think I was surprised going into this one how much of each of these movies we
It's
were
a lot.
actually watching, and how much of like the plot is actually being like these are like kind of self-contained bite-sized ways to watch these movies that trims out a lot of the fat and just occasionally pops in an incongruous Elvira from time to time. And like, yeah, so this is kind of a cost-effective way to absorb some of these movies. And if you want to go out and seek these out, they're all pretty findable these days. But yeah.
Oh yeah, and the one thing like this movie didn't show up in Blockbuster. This is all the mom and pop shops.
Mhm.
Like, and some of these movies, some of the movies themselves showed up in Blockbuster, but like you couldn't find Filmgore anywhere after a certain period of time. But yeah, it just gave you that whole, this is what we're watching, this is the best parts of it, move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And that, that's how I got to finally, like, I didn't bother with seeing Blood Feast for years because I'm like, I saw it in Filmgore. And when I finally saw Blood Feast, I'm like, yeah, I saw it in Filmgore.
You saw a fast
worked
version.
out.
Yeah, honestly, that might, like, no disrespect to Herschel Gordon Lewis, but that might be the best way to watch Blood Feast. Blood Feast is pretty groundbreaking in a lot of ways, but does it have a lot of downtime? It has a lot of it has a whole lot of all right, just keep the camera rolling until we get to 4 reels. It's a lot of that stuff.
You mentioned
the longest
Herschel
the
Gordon
longest
Lewis.
70 minutes ever.
Yeah, it really is.
This is an episode of firsts because I don't really think, shockingly, I don't think on our show we've really had the opportunity to talk much about Herschel Gordon Lewis. But before we do that, John, I want to ask, did you grow up on Long Island too?
Yeah, I'm still here now. I've been here my entire life.
So let me ask you this, and Steve, I don't know if you've ever explicitly said this either, if you had one, but like, what was your mom and pop video store?
There was a place in Oakdale called Video Zone when I was growing up. But when I was a teenager, there was a place in Patchwork called 112 Video, and he actually had the bootlegs on the shelves. So that's how I got to see all the Argento stuff. But he was like a principal bootlegger. If an official release came out, he took the bootleg down, put the official release up. But yeah, Video Zone's where we rented this from, and this was I'm gonna assume I'm several years older than both of you. With the video memberships back then, you had to pay for them, and it wasn't by rental. It was like you paid for a package, and in that package there's 30 rentals per package. So you were very selective about what you rented. So like I remember the first 2 movies we rented was Raiders of the Lost Ark and Blood Beach.
Oh yeah,
and
a classic double feature.
Oh, absolutely. How can you? But John Saxon finding a severed dick in a hot dog, sure, why not?
Why not?
But
But and that happened in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is crazy. Yeah.
No.
Just
damn
when
Disney
you thought
cuts.
you could just when you thought you could punch more Nazis, you can't get to them. No, so my mom and pop video store was a place called Video Maniacs, and I lived in Woodhaven, Queens, which was like, kind of eastern Queens, not too far from like the Nassau border of Long Island. And those Video Maniacs, and then when I was a little bit older, like you're kind of saying, was like also in Forest Hills in Queens was the larger chain, which wasn't Blockbuster yet at that time, was Captain Video. And then there was another, and also there was a Hollywood Video. And Hollywood Video was actually, of the chains, pretty good about having like exploitation stuff on their shelves.
Yeah.
Steve, what about you?
Are the closest thing we had. So y'all grew up in the city. I grew up in the very, very, very rural Colorado, like, 20-minute drive to the nearest gas station kind of thing. But luckily, our nearest gas station had a video section in the back. So Evergreen Station is what I still think of as my go-to mom and pop video store. And when you say mom and pop video store,
Steve, it never gets old.
It never gets old. It's evergreen. Absolutely.
I'm
It's
sorry.
timeless.
That was not worth interrupting you for, and I apologize.
As far as I know, it is still there, and they are still renting DVDs. So hey, good for them. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't like curated in the way that a mom and pop store would be, or even a Blockbuster would be. I think they just bought everything. They just stocked their shelves, and they just weren't picky. So like, I did get a pretty nice cross section. There were like a couple of big gaps, like some big classic movies that never made the shelves, but then there are things like People Under the Stairs, which I discovered through that. Oh my god, my cat is an idiot. But People Under the Stairs was a big one, I remember, and they had a little horror section that I mostly was not allowed to touch, but it had a lot of full moon movies on there. It's where I saw a lot of these covers for the first time. So I think they stayed away from anything like too edgy or too hardcore, because I don't think they were thinking about their selection so much as just like, what's our budget? Yeah, we'll get these videos. That's fine. Yeah.
Well, that
One of my favorite. Oh, go ahead, John.
Back in the day, VHSs were like $80.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember trying to buy the VHS, the HBO Thorn Emmy copy of Dawn of the Dead, and my jaw dropped when it was $85. I'm like, are you serious? For a 13-year-old, that it might as well have been $1 million.
I mean, we talked about that a lot. Like E.T., when E.T. came out on home video,
I was just going to say this.
That's kind of the moment when VHS became like affordable. That's why I think E.T. launched at like $24.95 or something like that, which was something people could swing. And from there, people could start. And that video was such a massive, massive success that other people started selling VHS as well, and people could start to build their own home collection. Yep. And people don't remember, like, it took a long time for video to get to that point. Like for a good 5-6 years there, rental was kind of your only cost-effective like option, and that's why those rental chains blew up the way they did.
Crazy. Because they started so pricey. Like I can even picture some ads for like stuff that was just coming out. It was like, own this on VHS for $79.95. But after ET, and I remember actually going, I think, to 34th Street Macy's to buy ET on VHS, because they did a thing where if you bought the movie, you got like a little ET plushie doll. And so I remember buying that. And then I think it took a long time, because that movie came out in 82. I think it was released in VHS in 88, which was like a pretty decent time later. But after that, like from 89, 90, 91, the price of VHS dropped so drastically. I mean, unless you were buying them from Suncoast Video. But like they dropped to being like under $20 generally as a rule, to where like, which allowed, I didn't grow up with like a rich family or anything, but my parents bought me like store-bought VHS tapes of movies. Like by 1991, I had probably every Friday the 13th, like Paramount VHS, and every Nightmare on Elm Street, like media home entertainment VHS. And they weren't that much. And I will just say one more thing about mom and pop stores, because they only would really have like one copy of a movie. There was like the most crushing feeling in the world would be going to a mom and pop video store in like 1985 and seeing the rubber band around the one copy with no card in front of it.
Yep. Every time kids today. I mean, this is one of my many rants that make me crumble into dust and blow away. But like, I don't think kids have an understanding of like the thought that, oh wait, I want to watch this movie. You mean I can't find this movie? Like it's pretty accessible, unless they're like looking for some deeper cuts, like what you're finding is going to be pretty accessible, and like you don't have to like wait for somebody to return a tape or anything like that.
The reservation list was your friend.
Exactly.
I was
Yeah,
on
you
that
definitely wanted to get on
list.
that.
I remember that reservation list for Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
Oh, yeah.
I saw it in the theater, and I was there the first day they got it, and the reservation list was already 3 weeks. But it was like, even though I saw the movie, I was just like slathered with anticipation for it. And the reservation list was your friend. Now I could watch on my phone on the train into the city. It's
pretty crazy.
It loses a little magic for me doing it that way. It really does. It like the whole spooky season. I was like, my big admit stand is I'm only watching DVDs and Blu-rays. I'm not streaming anything, because my DVD collection is pretty pretty good.
Sure.
But I just made like there's something just missing from. I mean, if you have to go to Tubi, it's wonderful that Tubi's there, but like
Mhm.
hence for Filmgore. But there's just something. It's just lacking a little bit of magic for
Absolutely.
me.
No, I'm with you. I'm
Yeah.
with you completely. Well,
Well,
we should
Steve,
learn a
why
little
don't
bit.
you? Yeah, I was just going to say, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about Filmgore? Like, what exactly is this thing? What movies are compiled in this collection?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is going to be one where we have a lot of interesting history to go into, more so than a lot to say about the movie itself. But let's dig into it. Filmgore was released in 1983. I couldn't get an exact date on that. It's hard to say. It was directed by Ken Dixon, and it's written by Dixon and Forrest Ackerman, and it stars Cassandra Peterson. That's it, just Cassandra Peterson. Filmgore is part of a long-lost tradition of compilation films, or as I've come to think of them, clip show movies. So, like TV clip shows, compilation films have kind of all but gone the way of the dodo these days because of streaming, basically. Like, we all remember watching like every couple of seasons, we would need a Simpsons clip show to recap the last like 150 episodes of whatever you watch. Those are so archaic and so skippable now when you're rewatching it on streaming, because it's like, what are you talking about? I watched all of these. But for, again, to be an old man yelling at a cloud, these were necessary evils kind of back in the day, because in the days before TiVo or before streaming, if you missed an episode of your favorite show, it was quite possible that you were just never going to see it again. There are a lot of shows that I watched that were canceled and never released on DVD, and like, I'm never going to see that again.
Steve, can I bring up an aspect of this that maybe isn't completely obvious, but that like you're totally right. It's for, maybe there are episodes that you missed. When I liked something when I was a kid, and I think this is still safe to say to this day, I was very much like a collector and a completist about certain things. And so
Yeah.
I would tape episodes of The Simpsons, and I would take when they aired, and then when they went into syndication, I would just pop blank VHS tapes in and just record all 6 hours SLP speed, to get as much as I could
Exactly.
on there.
Yeah.
And then I would do that, and I would tape other shows that I liked. But when dealing with syndication, for whatever reason, some episodes don't air as frequently. Something, maybe there's a rights thing or a music thing, or the network decided they don't want to show this one. What clip shows came in handy for sometimes was like, if I couldn't find this episode, if I didn't have this one particular episode on tape, but there was part of it compiled in the clip show, like I sort of felt like I had it. Like if
Yeah.
there was like a couple of scenes from a Simpsons episode that didn't air very often, but it was in, So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show.
Right.
Then it would be like, okay, well, I don't have the episode, but I have a couple of minutes of it, or I have something from it here. And I think, and it made me feel like I had at least something, because I was obsessed with compiling these things. And this will
Yeah.
come as a surprise to no one who knows me, but even before any of the official like Simpsons episode guides existed, I didn't have access to the scripts and stuff. So I would give them their own made up titles, and I would write the
Totally.
titles on a piece of loose leaf and fold it up and put it inside the sleeve of the VHS tape.
Which is kind of where it's things like that sort of led to, like, every episode of Friends is titled with like the one with the blank, right? That's
Yeah.
a reference to this practice, right? Where you don't know exactly what the episode name of The Simpsons is, but oh, it's the one where Homer buys a trampoline. Like you can do things that way. And Friends is another good example of, like, they would do clip shows. That show was kind of lightly serialized, not really in the sense that we think of serialized TV later, but in the sense of like, oh, there are plot threads that there's some history with these characters you might need to know, and they'll do recaps like that. With The Simpsons, it was just like, oh, these are some great gags you might have missed. These are the jokes we were proud of. These are the things that like we thought were funny to include. But either way, I think these kind of have a reputation of being sort of cheats in a lot of ways. Like, I think a lot of these clip shows were thrown together because of writers' contracts, they had strikes going on, or they had like, maybe it's just late in the season and you don't really have a whole lot of energy to write a new episode, so you throw in a clip show. And so they kind of developed that reputation. And I think the Filmgore, the compilation films, were kind of applied in the same way. And I think, like I said, if you missed an episode of a TV show and you weren't taping it and weren't watching it live, there's a good chance you were going to lose it forever. And that was very much the same way with B movies and horror movies of the 60s and 70s and even into the early 80s before film preservation and home video became really prevalent. A lot of these movies that we're seeing in this film could very well have been lost forever, because if a film comes out, if it doesn't really do well, or if the distributor goes broke, which happened often, film prints were just destroyed. There's countless movies out there that we'll never even know that are just gone forever because it was cheaper to just destroy the film stock than to try and do anything else with them.
Well, I remember reading there was an article in Fangoria, like early in Fangoria's days, like the first 25 issues. They were talking about this very thing, and Filmgore was mentioned. The one thing that was pointed out is this was done in a lot of ways because they were losing the rights to a bunch of these films.
Yes.
So this is like kind of like, we're gonna put out, Iron Maiden put out their greatest hits album to complete their contract. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So because I know, for the one thing I do know is right after Filmgore came out, Texas Chainsaw Massacre became property of New Line Cinema.
Yes.
So this was like, this was Charles Band's like, I paid money for this property. I'm going to get every dime I can out of it, which I can't blame him. So that to me, and I kind of had the feeling with Terror in the Isles, a lot of that was the same thing. Like kind of like I know Dress to Kill apparently was a rights issue, and so there was a lot of Dress to Kill in Terror in the Isles.
Yeah.
So I kind of wonder how many of these films fell under that criteria. I mean, personally, I don't care. It's the most wonderful collection in the world for me. It's joy for me.
Well, so going way back to the kind of origins of the compilation film, these started in World War II. These were used as like propaganda, both on the Nazi side and on the U.S. side. Like we would compile samples from different movies, different interviews, different news footage to kind of convey a message, and it was used effectively to that regard. Then the 50s come along, television starts becoming the prominent or the most dominant form of media. And so some companies, like Walt Disney was particularly smart about this. They would take episodes of their TV shows, compile them up into one like 90-minute package and put it out as a separate movie. So there's a bunch of like Davy Crockett movies in the 50s that are just 3 episodes of the TV show.
And that lasted for so long because I can remember all through the 80s watching the Magical World of Disney. And like the Wonderful World of Disney. And it would just be these weird collections and a bunch of things sort of seemingly thrown together. Like you said, it would be like, okay, what am I going to watch today? Well, here's like a Donald Duck short, and here's the Apple Dumpling Gang.
Exactly. And it wound up kind of being a good thing because I think a lot of those Davy Crockett episodes are probably lost, but the movies are preserved, it's a way, it was kind of an accidental way of them to preserve movies. A lot of other companies would start jumping on this bandwagon. Like sometimes they would take footage from other movies, package it together, maybe have it shoot like a wraparound sequence or something. We talked about this a little bit with like the 12 Days of Horror, whatever it was called. 12 Slays of Horror. Christmas. The 12 Slays of Christmas. Thank you. And, they would shoot this wraparound footage and then just kind of release it as a new movie. So a bunch of Godzilla movies had that treatment. I think one of the later Pink Panther movies kind of did the same thing. And it wound up being very unpopular because people would show up thinking they're seeing a new Godzilla movie or a new Pink Panther movie, and they're just watching like 90% footage that they've seen before. So it kind of became an unpopular promise. But the movie that kind of
any listeners who want to hear us continue musing about this type of sentiment, just wait a couple of months until our Puppet Master: The Legacy and Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys episode.
Yeah. Those are definitely leaning on that kind of idea. But I think kind of the breakout genre or the breakout entries for this genre as a film, and probably still the most successful examples, are the That's Entertainment films. Okay, so 1974, we got That's Entertainment. And basically it is just a 2.5-hour compilation of the best song and dance numbers from the golden age of MGM musicals. And this is actually a really good way. Like this is a very entertaining way to absorb some of these things, because similar to a lot of the horror movies that we're going to be talking about, a lot of those MGM musicals have very disposable plots, a lot of downtime, a lot of things you don't care about. And then they'll have some of the most spectacular dance sequences you'll ever see, or one of the best musical numbers you'll ever see. And so it was kind of a smart idea to just like cut out the middleman, let's just give you this stuff. Like, we'll just give you like the biggest stars of Hollywood doing their thing, and you'll have a great time. And people turned out for it. These were huge hit movies. They made 3 sequels of them, the last of which was released in 1994. So like these things kept going and remained very popular. But these are probably the best known examples. And this is kind of what Filmgore, in its down and dirty, gross and gritty way, is drafting off of. So that's exploitainment is the title you could apply to this one, you know. But this also kind of lets us talk once more, and we've covered this a little bit before, but one of Charles Band's earliest hobbies, earliest obsessions when he first moved to Hollywood was film preservation. All right. And the story is in his autobiography. It's a great story, but to recap it, basically he became friends with the actor Roddy McDowall, who was a huge early proponent of film preservation. He basically would go to drive-in theaters and buy up all of their film reels before they were destroyed at the end of the movie's run. And then he stored it in his basement. A lot of those prints were eventually transferred onto VHS, and Charles Band became obsessed with this idea. The two of them started collecting together and simultaneously and swapping movies back and forth. And I don't even know how many movies still exist to this day because of Roddy McDowall and Charles Band and people like them who were going to the trouble of preserving these movies. But we've talked about it in the past, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre probably would not exist, probably would not be regarded as the kind of masterwork that it is if Charles Band hadn't pulled that one out of the dumpster, because Texas Chainsaw was a huge hit, very talked about, very controversial, even like critically acclaimed in its time. But it had the misfortune of being released by Bryanston Entertainment, which is a company that does not exist anymore and did not exist very shortly after Texas Chainsaw came out. So like we said, it bounced around from property to property for a while. And at the time the Filmgore came out, Charles Band was the owner of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is why he released the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Atari game, which we talked about on my other show, Cinema Arcade. Check that one out. But yeah, so that's kind of one of the cooler contributions that Charles Band has made to the film landscape. And guess what? He's the last guy that's still doing these movies. Charles Band is still releasing compilation movies to this day. Like you have a hard time determining exactly how many film credits he has, because if you go on to IMDb, it's going to be cluttered with a bunch of like noir re-releases, and then movies like The Devil Inside Her, which is just Meridian, Pit and the Pendulum, and Dark Angel spliced together, or Killjoy Terrify, which is just taking the moments from the Killjoy series that look the most like the Terrifier movies and releasing it as kind of like a mockbuster knockoff. Like, so
I didn't know about that one.
Yeah, those are new. Those two are both brand new. Those came out within the last year. So like, and there's countless other ones where he'll just like take different killer doll movies and release them as something different. Like
he got us a few times. He got us a few times where somebody picked from like the spreadsheet and it was like, okay, that's cool. That's one I don't know. And then like I pull it up on IMDb and I'm looking at the cast list and I'm like, wait, this is the same people that were in these other movies, and then they don't even really have IMDb information. So then in doing some internet digging, it's like, oh, this is a compilation of, you know, Decadent Evil and Doll Graveyard and something else. And it's like, oh, okay, well, you know, the majority of those movies we've already covered, so this is probably a waste of time.
Yeah.
And we, you know, we reach out to that person and say, we got to schedule something else. That's happened multiple times with these anthologies. But for anyone who is wondering, who is not familiar with Filmgore, it is a collection of Blood Feast, 2000 Maniacs, Astro Zombies, Carnival of Blood, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Drive-In Massacre, Snuff, Fiend, The Driller Killer, and Dr. Jekyll's Dungeon of Death, which, you know, we don't have to obviously go through all of these segments. I mean, Texas Chainsaw is pretty well-worn territory at this point. I don't know how much we really have to say about that.
Yeah.
I will say that for Dr. Jekyll's Dungeon, that one, man, that is a hilariously edited condensed version of that movie in this collection. Like, that's a movie that I've never actually seen, but watching the segment here, it was making me laugh because it's so like dramatic and over the top, but then it would just have these really dramatic cuts in it, which it does a number of times. But it's definitely a very interesting collection of movies, or at least, you know, segments of movies. But watching it, and I'm sure this is probably true of all of us and of a lot of the people listening. Um, I had a real, especially during the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequence, I had a real twinge of like very sense memory nostalgia, like very heavy sense memory, to where it really took me back to like I'm watching this movie in, for lack of a better way to put it, like its worst presentation. Like
This
it's
is
hard to see, it's
one of
dark.
this is one of the ugliest transfers we've had to watch. It only exists on Tubi and it has not been restored. So that's something people need to keep in mind if you are going to check this out.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
with Texas Chainsaw. Yeah, go ahead,
It
John.
reminds me a lot of the first time I saw Chainsaw on VHS.
Yeah.
Because it's like I remember sitting there and what the hell am I looking at? But it's but it also is like a little bit of a nostalgic thing because I remember seeing it and still loving it.
Yeah.
Now it's available in 4K and it's beautiful to look at, but it wasn't shot beautiful.
No.
I think Blu-ray is the best presentation for that movie. 4K is just like, yeah, I really don't need to see Franklin's pores here. But some of these movies for this format, like Drive-In Massacre, which is a dog shit of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a terrible movie. It's a perfect presentation for that movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is.
Yeah,
I would say that's kind of true of most of the. I haven't seen all of these in their full form. I've seen the 2 Herschel Gordon Lewis movies. I've seen Texas Chainsaw, obviously, and I've seen bits and pieces of the others here and there. But like, I think the only one of these that has any kind of real like reputation that's endured is probably Driller Killer, because that's an early Abel Ferrara movie. It's very it's a pretty grim and grotesque movie, but like that he did turn out to be like kind of a major filmmaker for a little bit there, and he's a fascinating filmmaker. So it's part of an oeuvre, whereas the others are not necessarily. You don't need to really seek them out. I mean, the Herschel Gordon Lewis of it all is pretty cool. It does give us a good opportunity to talk about the Wizard of Gore himself, who, he was not quite like the impresario that like Roger Corman was. Like he wasn't like the salesman, and I think that's why we don't often talk about him in the same breath as like Corman. But he was a very important early figure, especially for film special effects, practical gore effects, things like that. He was doing stuff in the 60s that like you look at it now and you're still like, I see the seams of it, I see how it happens, but like the sentiment behind this is pretty shocking still. And like you can imagine in a Hollywood that still is like technically under the thrall of the Hays Code, like these are transgressive and these are like upsetting.
Well, he was truly a pure exploitation filmmaker.
He was.
Before that, he was doing like the nudie cuties and all that.
Yeah,
and like his Showman was his part of David Friedman. If you ever get a chance to read his autobiography, I think it's called A Youth in Babylon, exploitation filmmaker's journey. Because he also produced Isla, She-Wolf for the SS. When he broke away from HG, he still kept making movies.
Yeah,
but the
he
one
lived to be
thing
like
about
90.
him was, the one thing about him was like, okay, well, what hasn't been done before? Gore. So he just like, okay, we're gonna turn it up to 10 and go for it. Doesn't matter if it's a mannequin leg. We put enough meat and blood on it, it's gonna look great.
Yeah,
and for the time it did, even though it was wooden as hell.
Oh yeah. No, the acting in these things are terrible. Like it's really kind of cringy to sit through a lot of it. The filmmaking is like very pedestrian, but they are doing like they're putting on like a carnival sideshow for you in a very real way. And like, you go into a carnival sideshow expecting that what you're going to see is probably fake, but it's going to be grotesque and it's going to like stick around in your mind. And that's sort of what he's doing with these movies. And I think the truncated version of these that you get in Filmgore are perfectly acceptable ways to watch these movies.
Yeah, carnival, like a carnival sideshow, or however you just put it, is a really good way to put it, because being someone who grew up on psychotronic movies and grew up with Mystery Science Theater 3000 and those things, like like when I think of the ilk of a lot of the movies that are captured here, I don't often get a chance during the show to talk about Ray Dennis Steckler and like the incredibly strange creatures who stopped
Mhm.
living and became mixed up zombies, like
Yep.
stuff like that, or all the Ted V. Michaels stuff. So
Yeah.
like in Astro Zombies, which is a Ted V. Michaels movie, it made me think, it made me, remember some stuff that I enjoyed when I was younger because I think Tom Pace, the actor, is the guy who shows up first in that Astro Zombie scene. And I'm
Mm.
like, in my brain, I'm like, oh, it's the guy from Girl in Gold Boots. And Girl in Gold Boots, another Ted V. Michaels movie. And all of these people who were making movies at this time, in the late 60s, yeah, it's like there was such a bizarre carnival funhouse like vibe to all of them.
Mhm.
And they all kind of bleed together for me. I mean, then this movie, what I do enjoy about the way that this is curated is like we don't get anything truly 80s because by the time this movie would have been made, the 80s weren't really the 80s yet. So the
No.
last couple of
No.
things that you get in the movie, like Fiend or Dr. Jekyll, those movies are like 1979. I think those came out, or 1980. Fiend came out, might be the most recent one. Um, but you can see the transition from like this Herschel Gordon Lewis, Ted V. Michaels aesthetic, then moving into the 70s to the more of what I equate with Grindhouse feeling. So like we're talking about Drive-In Massacre, which
Yeah.
is, is that Stu Seagal?
I think so.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the guy who went on to executive produce Silk Stockings
Is that
and
the same
You didn't
guy?
know that?
and Renegade with Lorenzo Lamas.
Yeah, that's the guy. You're right. Oh wow, I did not
That's
realize that
awesome.
was the same guy. That's funny.
Yeah, so like and you see it. I think the juxtaposition. We haven't even really talked about like obviously the most modern thing being the wraparound segments, but like or modern at least in aesthetic, not so much in
Oh yeah,
concept.
we'll
But
get to
like
that. I do have to throw out real quick while I'm on the Wikipedia page. Drive-In Massacre, co-written by George Buck Flower,
Yeah, I
that's
believe
awesome.
that.
regular
John
contributor to
Carpenter.
Full Moon. Yeah. Sorry, continue,
Yeah,
Jared.
sorority babes in the slime ball bowl around the zone. George
Yep.
Buck Flower.
Back to the Future Zone.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you see like the juxtaposition in the movie from Blood Feast to then Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's crazy to think that those movies were really only, 10 or 11 years apart. Just the techniques. It's like, Blood Feast, yeah, Herschel Gordon Lewis is doing crazy things with the splatter in that, but it's a lot of just kind of like static shots of things. And then the first Texas Chainsaw scene that it shows is the Terry McMinn scene, and it's like you're watching the camera move, and it's so like even in a crappy SD, as it looks watching it, it's still so like artfully done. And
Yeah.
you can see already like that one stands out, and it was especially when it's sandwiched between, I don't remember exactly which one came next because they weren't done sequentially,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
but
forget the
like
order.
it might be a Drive-In Massacre, which will make most movies look like Citizen Kane by comparison.
True. Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. Like you can see even in this really shitty transition, like when he gets hit in the head with the hammer and is like convulsing on the floor, I could not physically see
Yeah.
what was happening because
But that's
the
how I saw that movie for the first time. Like I
right. Yeah,
saw
you
that
saw it
movie on a
dubbed on a
shitty
shitty. Yeah.
VHS on like a
Yep.
17-inch TV
Yeah.
where I
Yeah. Yeah.
couldn't tell what was happening in most of the frame.
But
So
even
for me, that
even
like really brought me back.
even in these little clips like sandwiched between these shittier movies, like you can really see the filmmaking that Toby Hooper is bringing to this movie and why it kind of
Yeah.
stands out. Like I always think of that shot, the slow following the actress as she's like walking to the house, and it looks like on the surface like an exploitative like butt shot of like this attractive young girl, but what it's really doing is giving us a geography of the house, like we're seeing this house like looming over her, and B, we are seeing that the back of her dress is completely open backed, so that in a few minutes when she gets put on that hook, we have zero like we can't rationalize what's happening to her. It's like, oh, it's snagged on her shirt. Oh, it's snagged on this. It is setting up that kill in a subliminal way that is so brilliant, and ways that I don't think any of the other filmmakers in these other movies in this film would think about. So yeah, I always think
what you're seeing when you go from like Blood Feast to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're also seeing the influx of film students coming in.
Yeah.
H.G. Lewis admittedly was a huckster. He even said it himself.
Yeah.
Toby Hooper came out of University of Texas like, yep, we're making a film. And I mean, some of these films don't match that, but like Driller Killer, Abel Ferrara was always shown to be a very talented filmmaker, no matter what the subject matter. But like Snuff, Snuff is one of my favorite exploitation stories of all time. I love the background of that movie so much. The only sad part is that someone died to turn it into Snuff, the actual filmmaker.
Also, I don't think I know this story.
Yeah.
Well, basically, Michael and Roberta Finley, they produced and directed the film, and they made for like, I think it was like $10,000 in South America, Argentina. Sorry,
right, because it has the tagline of like, it could only be shot in South America where life has no value.
Yeah, I'm mixing that tagline with the actual location.
So
but what they were doing was they were doing a knockoff of the Manson murders.
Oh yeah.
And then Michael Finley died in a helicopter accident down there after the film was done. So this porn producer, I think his name was Alan Shackleton, bought the movie from the Finley's estate, because he's very successful in the porno business, and basically like, yeah, I'll buy this movie for like $11,000. Then he watched the movie like, wow, this is a pile of shit. So he tacked on this extra killing at the end of the movie, which they show in its full glory, and changed the title from Slaughter to Snuff. And then he informed women's rights groups that they're showing the Snuff film on 42nd Street. So he started his own controversy and made money hand over fist. And as an 11-year-old, two moments of this movie stood out for me more than anything when I was 12 years old, was the end of the Snuff sequence. Because 12 years old, I'm stupid. I believed it. And the lesbian shower scene in Driller Killer. I never saw anything like that in my life. I was like, my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Well, that's another thing about movies like this too, is it was a way to kind of Trojan horse we kind of went about this the wrong way in scheduling this, in that we probably should have at some point covered the best of sex and violence first before Filmgore.
Yeah.
But I don't think it really matters. But I think like that's another aspect of it too, is like, maybe you aren't allowed to rent certain movies when you're a kid, but if there's another movie that's just a compilation thing, maybe the thought process is like, well, it can't show anything that bad. It's clips from like movies, and then you get these kind of extended ones like the lesbian shower scene and Driller Killer for sure. I don't want to go back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre for too long, but I do just want to ask, because we're talking about the shittiness of the transfer and how that was the way that we all experienced it. I mean, I think with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, probably something that went from having like the least visible prints available to now something that, like we said, is in 4K. Have either of you seen Chain Reactions?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. I want to, in the worst way.
So it's good. I think the thing about Chain Reactions that maybe turns some people off is because it is one of those Alexander O'Philippe movies. He's very into like people's perspective and like legacy of things more than he's into like behind the scenes stuff, which is fine because Texas Chainsaw has been documented to death.
Yeah.
And so the cool thing about this doc is it takes 5 people: Patton Oswalt, Takashi Miike, Alexandra Heller Nicholas, Stephen King, and Karen Kusama. And they each have a segment that's about 15 minutes long where they talk about their experience with seeing Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time.
Oh, that's cool.
And one of the common threads throughout it is how they all saw it in like different but equally shitty presentations.
Yeah.
some are just, really washed out film, or some are on like a super pixelated and dark VHS. And like, that's what it made me think of. It's like one of the common, comments made by people throughout the movie is about how, like, I think maybe part of the appeal of this movie is that I couldn't physically see what was happening through so much of it.
It really feeds into the nightmarish quality that movie has, which is like you're never fully sure that what you're seeing is what you're seeing. Yeah, and I would be remiss if at this point we did not talk about our hostess with the mostest, one Miss Cassandra Peterson as Elvira. I think this is like the only official opportunity we'll have to talk about her on this show. But I will to plug my other show early once again on Cinema Arcade, the other show I do. We watch movies and then we play video games based on those movies. And part of our October lineup included Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, which has an early 90s DOS game that we got to play in connection with that very fun movie. But so if you want to hear a lot more about Elvira, you can hear that whole episode. It's a lot of fun. You can check that out wherever you get podcasts. But
I also feel like Steve probably did this on his show already, but I also want to I want to plug Cassandra Peterson's book, Yours Cruelly, Elvira. Which is a fantastic read.
She's had
truly remarkable.
She's had this incredibly fascinating, glamorous life. Like, she's the classic, like, small town girl from Kansas who became a dancer and then a burlesque performer and like a Las Vegas showgirl, all of that. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, she became one of the founding members of the hugely influential improv troupe, the Groundlings, alongside people like Lynn Marie Stewart, John Paragon, and Paul Rubens, who, of course, would go on to create Pee Wee Herman, based off of a character from the Groundlings. So she had been workshopping this kind of like Valley Girl kind of ditzy character to play during this. And she adopted the kind of like goth trappings of Elvira when she got the opportunity to audition to replace a horror host on a local access show in LA. And this used to be a very common thing. Like, Vampira was kind of like the first and most famous example of this, but it's basically just you get somebody in some kind of a Halloween garb and they are going to drop some puns and kind of keep things light when you're watching horror movies on TV. I think there was a lot of concern back in the early days of television. If you're airing some of these movies, is this too scary? Is this too intense? If you insert these guys into the mix here, they're making things a lot more fun. They're letting you know that this is just kind of a fun house and you're not meant to take it too seriously. Yeah. And that was a tradition that went on for a long time. Elvira, when she took over the position in 1983, she just became this like nationwide phenomenon, and this movie is capturing her kind of right at the beginning of that run. I think 84, 85 is when Elvira really becomes, like, because she's so great on talk shows and like she started becoming more syndicated and available in more markets, all the way leading up to Mistress of the Dark, which was her first feature film, and kind of the culmination of all of this fame. But yeah, we're getting her very early, but already pretty fully formed. Not a double entendre about anything there. But she was already, her persona was already pretty locked in, and that's basically she's going to sit on a tombstone. She's going to wear all these dramatic outfits and this big bouffant and put the cleavage on prominent display, and she's going to make these winky little, sometimes cringy one-liners like throughout the course of the movie. Sometimes they're going to be lightly related to something that we just saw. Sometimes they're going to be edited in seemingly out of random. But it's very jarring in this movie in particular, I think, because I think there's something about like the way that they cut the music out every time they go back to Elvira. All of these movies have kind of omnipresent scores going on the entire time. And whenever they cut to Elvira, it's just like dead silent, and so it's a little jarring. And then just the fact that she's coming in and saying like these goofy things in the middle of these very grotesque moments of gore, it's a little alarming, but it does kind of serve the purpose of like keeping things light, keeping things fun, reminding you that this is all like kind of for enjoyment.
Well, in the beginning of the movie, they don't present her as goofy because they had her sit on like some satanic statue. And this on the East Coast, the horror host was Zachary. Yeah, that was the big. Bunch of years later, after I saw this, when I was a little older and I was in my kind of mid-teens, what we became, at least in New York, we became aware of Elvira by I think it was a Bud Light campaign around Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I think she became nationwide, and then she became the pop culture phenom that she became.
Absolutely.
But I was so young at the time, the jokes actually were funny to me.
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh,
and
look,
like now he seems like, oh God, this is awful. But
they're always going to make me smile. They're always going to make me laugh.
yes.
I think she has a, I always love her delivery. Like she understands the context of these lines, and she understands, like, Elvira in a lot of ways always felt like the last vaudevillian to me. Like she would not be out of place, like on a traveling stage with like a boater hat, you know, doing like shtick and one-liners and getting the cane to pull her off when the jokes don't work, you know. Like, it's very broad in a very old-timey kind of way, and that's what was always very fun about her. She was never trying to be too hip or modern.
Well, that's why we have Seven Gully now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
How we pronounce it, but
and the Boulet brothers, like, there's a lot of, like, and Joe Bob has been keeping this tradition kind of alive for a very long time. Although Joe Bob's approach is always very different than what you see from like a Svengoolie or like or an Elvira, but yeah.
But we got to see her at a Fangoria convention in like the early '90s, and the way the whole, I mean, there's probably a 400 or 500 person attendance in the Roosevelt Hotel in New York City. The way everyone just gravitated towards it was just like, it was,
I bet.
I mean, not just because of the cleavage and all that, she just had this aura about her, and she made, you know, even my brother who couldn't stand her, like, oh, it's so corny, but he was just charmed by her. She definitely knew what she was selling. She was very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I need to make one small, I think it's a correction. People, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about my correction. I think Elvira's campaign was Coors Light, because I'm pretty sure I have it on a t-shirt. So that's why I think I know that it's Coors Light. I'm pretty sure at that point, you know, like 1987, 88, whenever it might have been, I think the Bud Light market was cornered by Spuds MacKenzie.
That's
okay,
right.
I always forget who
Right.
was associated
Spuds.
with which. Like, I knew who Spuds was, but I didn't remember what he was hawking.
But this is, I mean, I don't know if you guys actually remember this. This is also a time where the TV went off the air, and they played the national anthem. So she would she would close out the TV on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Like after whatever her show was called, I don't remember what it was called. All of a sudden, there's the national anthem. Then there's snow, and it's just like, I remember watching. I mean, it's not related to this, but I remember watching Poltergeist with my daughter years ago, and they had the whole scene where the ghost hand comes out of TV. She goes, "Why did TV just do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, you weren't alive for that, were you?" You know.
Yeah, and I think in that scene too, it's exactly what it did. In that scene, it's playing the national anthem too before it cuts to the static.
Elvira. Yeah, then.
to pull into the same conversation with all these horror hosts too. I mean, this is also around the time where, you know, cable TV started offering people an opportunity to have things playing later, and so you have Rhonda Shear and Gilbert Gottfried doing USA Up All Night, which, while it may not have been all night, was definitely, I always loved that being something that I could fall asleep to, because it was like, all right, well, I'm going to put my TV on, I'm going to put it on the USA Network. If it's 10 p.m., I'm probably going to fall asleep soon. You know, I'll either fall asleep to Fat Guy Goes Nutsoid and wake up to Bikini Car Wash Company, or it'll be the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, there's not too much more to say about Filmgore itself. Like, I don't know if I can fully, I don't know. I find it a really fascinating time capsule. I find it a really fascinating kind of relic of a genre that truly, like, is on the verge of death. Like, I think very, very rarely do we see like a genre of film just kind of like completely die off. But I think just because the way that technology has evolved, I think we are going to see fewer and fewer. I mean, we're already seeing almost none of these, you know, and it's basically just like, I can't imagine like a theatrical, like, compilation film being released like again in our lifetime, you know? So it's a strange little time capsule. And I think you show these to like younger people and they are just really not going to understand what the point of these are. But also at the same time, like, this is basically what YouTube is for a lot of people,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
like a lot of people
I was
consume
just gonna
movies in
say,
this way, like in clips
yeah,
or on TikTok. Yeah.
Was
I was
this
gonna say,
released on was this released theatrically?
I believe it got a very, very brief theatrical release, and then
Okay.
but it was mostly for the home video market. But the home video market in 1983 was just starting to kind of take off. Like this was
Yeah,
around the
that's
time
kinda
when
what I
Charles
figured.
Band opened the first video store in LA, and it went under in less than a year because not enough people owned VCRs yet. So had he opened that up like 2 years later, he would have been, you know, the new Blockbuster. But yeah, it was just kind of one of those where he was just a little bit too early to the party.
yeah. What has replaced these, in my opinion, is the listicle. Like,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
AMC is like, or, you know, like Shudder's 100 Scariest Moments type
Yeah.
thing. Like those kind of compilation shows and then instead of it being a wraparound segments, it's just kind of like talking heads. It's like, you know, the jump scare from Exorcist 3 plays, and then like David Desmelchian talks about the first time he saw it, and then it cuts to someone else, which those are great. I could watch those all day. And
Yeah, they're
really,
entertaining.
honestly, to give a shout out to like David Weiner and Creator VC for like the In Search of Darkness documentaries that they made. I could put those things on as background noise and like have it just go through, you know, 2 minutes of a movies sequentially through a decade with like, oh, now Dee Wallace is going to talk a little bit about something, and it's like, and then it'll cut to, oh, here's a segment about Charles Band, here's a segment about like J horror and its origins or something like that. I love those, and I'm really thankful that those
Yeah.
long form documentaries are being made. I feel like that's sort of supplanting what these movies were. And again, like companies like Troma and people like that, and maybe some boutique labels like Synapse or Vinegar Syndrome have put together, like I have this, you know, Blu-ray of the 42nd Street Forever trailers.
Yeah.
Like those are trailers though. That's not, you know, those aren't clips from the movie so much as they are, because I don't really know what goes into acquiring trailers. But what's notable about this movie was that Epix International tried to sue Charles Band for $125 million in
Oh God.
1983
Yeah.
for the lawsuit is hilarious for this because, you know, it was for Blood Feast and 2000 Maniacs, and
Yeah.
basically Epix International were saying that they had the rights to these movies and that Charles Band did not go down the right paths in order to acquire them for Filmgore. And they, in this suit, they claim that he perpetrated fraud, piracy, misappropriation of funds, and multiple breach of contract. Band basically filed a countersuit, which was like saying that said that you guys are trying to slander me and libel me as a producer and owner of this company, and essentially nothing, I don't think, really came out of this, but that was
Yeah.
a lawsuit happening.
You'd
And
have a hard
one
time
thing we
really making
haven't
an argument that Blood Feast is worth $125 million in any universe. Yeah.
$125 million in 1983 money
Yeah.
is like,
They wildly overestimate how many people are attached to the beloved franchise of Blood Feast.
right. Well, I mean, you know what? Like, it's sort of a comically conflated lawsuit number. It makes complete sense for something like this. I do want to take a second, though, to talk about, like, so, you know, these segments that, and I like that Cassandra Peterson as Elvira is she's sort of displaying all of the characteristics of what we love about Elvira,
Yeah.
but it is catching her at this time where the character is like still a little bit green, and I really
Yeah.
love that it timestamps it right there. But the puns, and some of them are like puns within puns within
Oh,
puns. There's like three within a sentence occasionally. Were written by Ken Dixon and Forrest J. Ackerman, and Ken Dixon, obviously, you know, people know as the director of Necropolis and some other very exploitative, you know, 80s stuff, often confused with Tim Kincaid,
yeah.
but, you know, not the same person. And Forrest J. Ackerman is a notable person too. I mean, we're talking about like Famous Monsters,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
you can't not talk about him in this. And, you know, to the point where I considered maybe doing this entire podcast in Esperanto.
Exactly. Yeah, we got to bring that back. No, I think the thing I like most about this movie, and it's replicating an experience that I don't think can ever really happen again, but it's that kind of like brown bag sort of naughtiness of it. Like the fact that this looks so shitty on Tubi is kind of like part and parcel. We've talked about it, but it's kind of like part and parcel with the packaging of this, which is like this feels like one of those dangerous movies that you shouldn't be allowed to watch. They shouldn't have like let this get out of the distribution center because it's so dangerous. And these days, I think the closest thing you can get is to finding like deep cut oddities on Tubi, but like you don't really get that kind of like backroom sort of thrill that you would get off of renting something like this back in the day. And that's kind of the best thing about it. If it's kind of an irrelevant film form at this point, just given the way that the world has evolved, it's still pretty interesting as an experiment and as a way of packaging these movies.
It reminds me of my time going to Times Square and going to the Grindhouse theaters.
Sure.
I was thinking that. I wanted to say, as the only New Yorker on the podcast, like it does have kind of an early Times Square kind of energy to it.
I didn't go in there a lot because at that time in New York City, Times Square especially, was not safe for 14, 15 from the suburbs. But I remember going in to see Dr. Butcher, MD. And the first 15 minutes were all trailers of the most crazy shit I never got to see. There was a hooker servicing a John 4 rows away from us. But it was just that moment. And that when I see Filmgore, I think about movies that aren't even on this movie, like The Undertaker and His Pals and stuff like that.
Right.
Last House on Dead End Street. I think about those movies. And even you said exactly, they felt dangerous.
Yeah.
They felt like, okay, yeah, we could do this fire stunt. Yeah, no problem. And then the poor bastard that did the fire stunt walked away with 2nd-degree burns. But hey, give him a 6-pack and he's good to go.
Right.
It's just that reminder of a time when films aren't made that way anymore, and for good reason. I don't want to, but there's just a rawness to it that you weren't getting in Nightmare on Elm Street 4 as much as people love that movie.
Right.
I personally don't know why, but there's just the best movie in here is obviously Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah.
And there's a rawness to that movie that's mixed with artistry that these other movies can't touch, but you'll never see another Texas Chainsaw in that form again. So it's a nice nostalgic piece for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I used to do this thing when I was a kid. I would take we had two, at one point, I'm going to say maybe around like 1989, 90, sometime around there. We had 2 VCRs. And what I would do is I would take VCR from one room and bring it into my room and hook them up together. And I would actually take my like VHS that I had, like stuff that I had taped off of TV, like a lunatic, and then store-bought VHS that I had. And I would actually make the equivalent of like a mixtape, but of a VHS stuff. And I would and it would be like almost to do this, to streamline like kind of the craziest stuff for my friends. And so I would put, a segment where, Philip gets turned into a marionette in Dream Warriors. And then I would put a really stupid TV commercial from like the time as an interstitial. And then I would put, like I had a lot of bootleg VHSs of like punk bands playing shows. So I would put like a song from a band set. And then it was very like work intensive because I had to like stop, pause, stop, pause, stop, pause. But, I would make these really wacky tapes, and I got this really wonderful nostalgic feeling watching this because that what it was reminding me of. It was like, granted, maybe it wasn't so much a cohesive wraparound segment like you have with Elvira here, but it would be a very purposeful like clip of a movie, and then something stupid, and then a music, and then something else, or a music video, and it was so fun to do, to just archive stuff in that way. And like this like reminded me of that. I mean, my intention there was just to, show my friends crazy stuff, where I feel like here the intention was probably twofold. One, as Charles Band is wont to do, is to try to, package out some things. Sorry, Charlie, no offense here, but in the cheapest way possible. But also to preserve, like you said,
Yeah.
some of these movies. Maybe it was also the reasoning behind it. And so, as exploitative as this is, it doesn't feel like a cynical cash grab completely, like some exploitation might. And it
Yeah.
really just like it made me think of like, you know, watching some crazy movie on USA Up All Night and reading the Psychotronic video guide and trying to figure out what these things were. It also reminded me of like before the internet, I would go in like the mid 90s when I started going to like punk shows. I would go to a show, and a lot of times, you know, there would be bands handing out demos, or there would be
Mhm.
the label would hand out a compilation CD. And so it would be like, well, if you like this band, like this compilation is all them plus the 12 other bands that are on the label. And that was
Mhm.
how I discovered a lot of bands that way, hearing one
Yeah.
song on like a compilation disc. And then, you know, oh, I have to order a Lookout Records catalog through the mail. And like,
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I was
yeah.
going through
And
my old CD collection recently. I still have so many of those like old like Fat Records or Punkorama or
Mhm.
like I've got all of
Oh,
those still. Yeah.
I'll never forget the first time I saw No Effects, which is about 30 years ago, and they handed out the Fat Records compilation. And I already knew the Epitaph stuff. So as I already
Yeah.
knew, you know, Bad Religion, Pennywise, Down by Law, all those bands. But a
Hmm.
lot of the Fat Records bands I didn't know yet. And so when I got that particular comp, it was like, oh, who's Good Riddance? Who's Strung Out? Who's
mhm.
Propagandy? Like, who
Right.
are these bands? And
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
some of those bands went on to become my favorites, but that was how I found them. You know, it was
It was
really
the same. It was the
DIY.
same way in the metal scene. It was the same way in the
Yeah.
metal scene. You go see Morbid Angel. Like, oh well, here's this compilation. Death is just the beginning. I'm like, oh my god, Bathory, and then all these other bands. And it was the
Hmm.
same thing. You were doing your own version, Night Flight. That's what you were doing with your VHS and
Oh my God,
stuff.
we didn't
Kind
even
of.
mention this movie is so Night Flight coded.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah. I guess
remember. I
Night
remember.
Flight's got to keep that alive.
You remember one episode of Night Flight where they showed a scene from Dawn of the Dead, and they intercut it with the Ramones playing Blitzkrieg Bop, and I was just sitting there like, this is the most
That's,
amazing thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, there was something as I was sort of like naming these references, I'm like, there's a big one that I'm missing, and it was Night Flight. That's it. And that's exactly what I was trying to do at that point. And, you know, for however the quality of the movies that might vary in this collection, there is a real DIY Night Flight aesthetic to this thing that made it really fun to revisit. Now, it's not the kind of thing I would go back and watch multiple times, but to sit and watch these movies as dark and gritty and grimy, you know, with some Elvira thrown in for good measure, it really made me it kind of hit me in the feels a little bit as it pertained to how I, you know, got to discover a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it definitely it was a nice little nostalgia trip. And like I said, I grew up very, very rural. Like it was physically hard to find a lot of movies like this. So like had I had something like this, it probably would have been like an awakening moment for me. I had something, I forget what it was called, but there was some early DVD that was sort of a compilation of different killer scenes from movies. And it had like
Oh,
ones, but they also had that was how I discovered this really cool New Zealand film called The Ugly, which still
mhm.
I know the one. I
yeah,
know the one.
you know the one.
What's the
Yeah,
name?
it had commentary by Robert Englund, and it's like, yeah, it had a
Yes.
bunch of different clips on there. Puppet Master was on there, like a bunch of other different things. So like,
Yep.
yeah, I had something similar to that, and it did make me go and seek out those other movies. And I'm like, oh, okay, this looks interesting. This looks cool. And or yeah. So it had its place. It definitely was a good introduction, and it's been
Steve,
fun to
is the
dig back.
one you're talking about, is it the Boogeymen?
It's Boogeyman. That's it.
Yep.
That's it. That's the one. I had it. I ordered it off of TV. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember that. Well, this has been a blast to dig back into
Yeah.
this. John, thank you so much for being here, for lending your expertise to this.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find all of
Of
your
course.
stuff?
I'm mostly active on Instagram.
Okay.
J.P. Collins. I'm mostly active on that. There is a Facebook, but I really don't do much outside
Yeah.
of family stuff with that. And I have another book out in submission now, and once the second book is out, I'll start an author page. So I'll keep you updated on that if you're
Hell
interested.
yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, no,
Gentlemen, thank you for
if
having
you
me. This is
oh, of course. Trust me, it's actually is very difficult for me and probably for Steve too to like do the let's wrap this up now for it to be respectful of everyone's time because with the rabbit hole that this is just scratching the surface of, I could talk for hours.
Fall
I think
down
that's
into
probably
this.
abundantly clear. But if you go on Amazon and look for John's book, John, remind me the actual name again. Is it Leeds Point Horror?
Yes, the Leeds Point Horror.
That's what I was gonna say, and then I was afraid I was getting a word wrong. No, definitely go and buy that and check it out, and maybe leave it, a good review on Amazon. And something you could do for our show is leave us a good review also on whatever podcatcher you're listening to. So 5 stars, a rating, maybe a little brief review if you feel so inclined to do so. If you want to keep up with us on kind of a daily to weekly basis, Instagram is the best way to do this. I will be also posting more on Blue Sky. Most likely not Threads, but Instagram is number 1. It's called Blue Sky number 2. There'll be some stuff in the Facebook group from time to time and maybe a few other Facebook groups. And as always, the audio versions of the show are available on YouTube. But I mean, it's Puppet Masters _Castle Freaks. I think if you're listening at this point, you already know that. And you can follow me also at _Giallo_Jared. But if you are listening for the first time, because you are a film historian for compilation movies, then welcome. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. You'll also be happy to know that this is not the only show that where you can hear Steve's wonderful voice. So Steve, what else have you got going on?
Why, thank you. I don't talk like that usually. You can also hear me on the aforementioned Cinema Arcade podcast. That is cinema and arcade mashed together. That's what we do. We watch movies and we play the video games based on those movies. When you're listening to this, we are in the height of holiday season, so it's all Christmas movies all month long. We're talking Nightmare Before Christmas. We're talking The Grinch. We're talking A Christmas Carol, and we are talking Rise of the Guardians. Everybody's favorite of those 4, easily. So we'll be digging into all of that, and then we've got a bunch of fun stuff coming up into the new year. And you're going to want to definitely check us out next week, because next week we are dipping our toes back into the steamy, sexy world, I should say, of Torchlight Entertainment. And we're going to be talking about the movie Petticoat Planet, which is, from what I understand, a planet with petticoats in it. And what's a petticoat? Don't ask me. I know it's something to do with Little House on the Prairie.
Have you ever? I was going to make like a Petticoat Junction reference.
See, I want to make a Petticoat Junction reference, but I don't actually know what that is. I know I've heard that mentioned, but I'm like, I don't want to say that because is that a war film? Is that a
No, it was a show. It was a
Hee-haw style comedy.
Show.
Okay.
Well, it's funny, Steve, that you bring up hee-haw, because somehow we escaped our entire Ooga Booga episode with the whole Hambo beginning without mentioning hee-haw. And I had it in my brain to talk about hee-haw. And then during the 2000 Maniacs segment of this movie plays very much like hee-haw, or the beginning of like a Dukes of Hazzard episode, because it's just people driving with banjo music playing. But I was like, hee-haw, that is a cultural reference from a certain time.
Yeah.
But no, Petticoat Planet, it's like, if you ever wondered what would happen if a malian, if you will, crash landed on a planet that's the Old West, inhabited only by women.
I often wonder that. So this is good that we're going to be able to get the answers to that question.
I'm finally getting some answers. Damn it.
Finally, my life will make sense. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will see you next week on Petticoat Planet.